Welcome everybody. Welcome to the Meshery development call. Today is the 7th of July, and before we get started with today's topics, we have another meeting which will happen on Saturday, this Saturday, 10th of July, and the timings are given on the meeting minutes. So it will be to identify some bugs in Meshery CTL, and we will join in call and we will walk through. We'll test Meshery CTL end to end. So if that's something that interests you, please join this Saturday. And if you are having problems with the time, just ping on the thread in Meshery CTL in the Slack channel. So for new contributors, this might be a good way to get started with using Meshery and testing Meshery. And Lee has shared a test plan. So our next release is 0.6, and we are testing Meshery components throughout. So we will be testing Meshery server and Meshery adapters, Meshery UI, all sorts of things. It is not just limited to Meshery CTL, but we will also have separate bug hunting meetings for the other components as well. Yep. With that, I see a couple of fresh faces on this call. So every week we will let newcomers introduce themselves to the community. So if you are new here, if this is your first time on the call, then please introduce yourself, and let me see. Krishna, Kaustubh, were you able to introduce yourself before?
Yeah, I was able to log into. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Who else would? Yeah, if someone is new, then feel free to introduce yourself. Even if you have introduced previously in some other call, also then this is a separate set of people most probably. So introduce here as well.
Hello, my name is Devopriya. This is my first Meshery development meet. I've attended a few meets this week. So I'm a first year student studying at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad. I know the basics of front end. I'm just starting out with my coding journey. So I might not know a lot of things yet, but I'm trying to figure out everything as and when I code. So I look forward to learning a lot.
That's awesome. Sorry to interrupt. Who introduced just a moment ago? I missed that. Devopriya is old news in my book, excuse me. So, who just introduced just before Devopriya?
Was it Krishna?
Oh, Krishna.
Yeah, but KK.
KK, yeah, that's right. KK.
Yeah, myself Krishna. I'm from the first year CSE from JIT. I'm a newcomer here, and I look forward to contribute to Meshery. Thank you.
Nice. Cool.
Hello everyone, this is Harshita. I'm pretty newcomer to Meshery, I guess. I just saw a couple of, I just made a couple of PRs. And I'm looking forward to contribute to Meshery CTL. That's my main interest right now in Meshery. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. Harshita, I think you have an open PR that like, I think you're waiting very patiently for review on. Cool, cool, good, good, good. By the way, just for everybody on the call, not all of you have enough bandwidth maybe to support a webcam, but if you do, we'd love to see your faces. So be friendly. All right.
Any others who would like to introduce themselves?
Yeah, hello. This is Bharat here. I'm a first year undergrad from GIT, and well, I'm quite new to this, but I have introduced myself before, and yeah, I look forward to contributing. And I came through a hackathon which was held by GIT again. Thank you.
Thank you, Bharata. Yeah. Any others? If you are having mic problems, then you can introduce yourself in the chat. I'm not sure if anyone else is remaining. So we will move on to the agendas for today. So first up, we have Lee. Lee, would you like to talk about the Meshery remote provider callback?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's first up, huh? We should, yes, I can. Utkarsh, do you think that it is better to talk about, it'll be more understandable if we first talk about support for Meshery CTL authing to Meshery server, and then talk about remote provider callback, or is it?
Yeah, it could be because in Meshery CTL, I had to come around it. So
Okay.
probably if you talk about this first and then.
Okay.
Yeah. So Utkarsh, would you like to share your screen and?
But I'm happy to I'm happy to talk anyway, give some context while Utkarsh brings this up.
So yeah, I think screen should be visible now. So I recently created a PR in Meshery. It was about being able to authenticate Meshery CTL, basically authenticate via Meshery CTL to Meshery server. And the PR is this. If anyone's interested, they can come in here and look. I'll demo what exactly it is about. So basically, as it says, it introduces two new commands to Meshery CTL. One is system login, and another one is system logout. With what basically the command conveys what it does, but what it essentially does is basically lets you log in via Meshery CTL and lets you log out, obviously. Earlier,
Utkarsh.
Yeah, his voice cut off. Even
Yeah.
me or did Utkarsh get stuck?
Yeah, what a lucky guy. He didn't get stuck in some weird. So. All right. Well, let me ask you. So I'll do some.
so the issue that we are trying to fix in
Utkarsh, your voice was breaking in between. Now it's not audible.
Cool. So Utkarsh will interrupt me when he comes back, what have you. So to give everybody some context as to the topic that Utkarsh is speaking on, he's, there's a lot of things that we do on this particular call are talk about either upcoming, designs for how the Meshery should work and things that it should be doing, changes and bugs and active PRs and that kind of a thing. Anita, who's on the call, is working to ensure that we every so often have like an intro to what the heck is Meshery, and sort of also / what the heck is a service mesh a little bit. And so she's working on getting those scheduled. And so a lot of times we'll take some time to explain a little bit of that on this call. So we're not going to do that at the moment, but let me relate. Let me see if I can make an analogy to what Utkarsh is about to show. He's talking about a user authenticating to Meshery. And he's going to show this from Meshery CTL, from Meshery's command line client. And so by show of hands, I suppose, in Zoom, since we never do this, I don't even know if I know how to do it. How many of you are familiar with Docker login? How many of you have ever used Docker login? Now you have to figure out, some people already know how to use the thumbs up. Some people are maybe like doing school remotely over Zoom and actually are quite good with Zoom, while some of the rest of us are Zoom challenged. All right, where the heck is the hand? How do you raise your hand? This is embarrassing.
There is a button called reactions in the bottom taskbar, the bottom bar, right?
Oh, gotcha. I just have to put it. And yeah, that open mouth, that's me. Okay, thanks. I just learned something. Oh, is that what reactions means? Is like, oh, okay. All right, good. Okay, so there's a few of us here that are familiar with Docker login. Is Utkarsh back on? I don't want to steal his thunder necessarily, but so when a user goes to use Meshery, Meshery provides identity by way of a provider. So like from the very start, when you go to use Meshery, you get presented with a login screen. And it's like on there, you can choose what provider do you want to log into. You can choose to log into the local provider that's just embedded in Meshery. It's called, I think on the UI, it is called none or local. I don't know that I also don't know that I've got Meshery running. So, but all of you who've used Meshery have seen that. So I'm gonna start up Meshery, system start. And good, and so if you choose, so right now, the only way to authenticate to create a session with Meshery server, right now, the only way to do that is through the web-based client. I'm going to share my whole screen so that and it's like, okay, well, that's good. But also the web-based client isn't the only client. There's the CLI as well. And so wouldn't it be nice to be able to authenticate from any client? Okay, yeah, great. And so that's basically what Utkarsh is bringing forth is a proposed command called Meshery CTL system, because system refers to Meshery and its components. Meshery CTL system login. And then it will facilitate the OAuth interaction, or it'll facilitate the provider specific authentication, which is good. It's a something for him to demo if he comes.
Well, I can demo now.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I hope it isn't crashes this time. Okay, let me do it quickly before it crashes again. So I think Lee has given all the context. So this is a command. If I start it up, it gives me prompt regarding that what provider I want to select. Is it going to be Meshery or is it going to be none? Those two providers are supported by default by now. Let's say I select Meshery. It opens up the browser for me, takes me to the provider flow, whatever it be. let's say select GitHub because that's what I use. And when it's done, it will redirect me to saying basically that, hey, you can close this window now. You're successfully logged in, and I get a prompt, basically not a prompt. I get an output in here which says that I have successfully logged in. Right now, the tokens are getting saved inside. By default, it's getting saved inside .meshery/or.json, and this is a token that got saved. It has information. This is basically the same thing that you might have downloaded earlier by accessing localhost 981. And when you would click on this get token, this is exact same thing, which is getting saved onto the file system in plain text format right now at least. This location gets basically we chose this location depending on what you have configured in your config in your context. So right now, if you want to see the context that I'm using is dev. Yep, current context is dev, as you can see, and I have said that hey, I want to use my token defaultly. I was actually testing something out. So my token location is defaulty. That corresponds to actually this particular location. That's where the token got saved. The second command that is also in the PR that I've added is the ability to log out. That is, you can do this and it will log you out. What it essentially does behind the scenes is basically clears out your token. Let's just quickly do the non-provider login. That's going to be way quicker because that's just basically because there is no as such authentication that happens when you actually select non-provider. So this is the authentication mechanism. So if someone may have noticed, coming to the second agenda that we have, if someone would have noticed that in order to get all of this thing working, a request was sent to this particular endpoint, which is localhost 42567. This is not something that Meshery actually spins up all the time. In fact, this address is basically generated on the fly. So when you were actually logging in, this temporary authentication server was created for you so that we can capture this token. This is owing to the to one of the thing that Meshery server does. What Meshery server does is basically it sort of hard codes the fact that if you want to do authentication via Meshery server, it will hard code the fact and ask Meshery provider to always redirect the authenticated request, that is a token based request, to Meshery server, and only Meshery server can read and process that thing. But that's not something that was needed in there. What we actually needed was a custom callback URL, which is one of the agenda. That is, we should be able to configure custom callback URL. We should be able to let Meshery server know that hey, you although the default behavior is supposed to be that you are going to be the one who is going to get the call, going to get the redirected call, which will have the token. But if a user wants to change that, they should be able to change that, so that it also kind of works for one of the use case that we had. That was basically what happens if Meshery is behind proxies. In that case, what you can do, what you should be able to do, what you would be able to do is basically you can ask Meshery server to say that I'm configuring a custom callback URL. It would be probably present in your config that I was just showing. It would be probably present in your config under context, or maybe somewhere else. I'm not sure. That's something yet to be proposed. But you should be able to configure your callback URL there, and then this kind of workaround that we have right now, that is, we create temporary thing. Actually, this will still be there. That is, we will still be creating the thing. But now after the proposed thing, that is, we should be able to configure the callback URL on the fly. Once that gets going, what we will be able to do is basically, instead of bypassing the authentication flow, we will be able to just use Meshery server for all of the things. That is, right now what happened was Meshery CTL actually queried Meshery server for the information regarding the provider, and then it actually went through the whole of the login process, and then it captured the token. But once that thing goes through, that is, you can configure the callback URL. Meshery server would be able to take care of that, and Meshery CTL would be, or all of the clients would be less, would have lesser responsibilities, and will also fix the issues that we have with proxies right now. So that's the two things. One, the login logout command, and another one is a proposal, that is we should be able to allow Meshery server to configure the fallback URLs. And I hope I was audible and didn't crash.
No, no, you didn't, Utkarsh. As
Good to know
people, like get around to what you are explaining, Samir, would you like to illustrate like the part where Utkarsh was saying?
Sorry?
Yes, 1 second. So, let me see if anybody can see this. Okay, so this is ideally the architecture diagram which we had. And what really happens, so we have a private endpoint which has been configured for our ISTO to access. So the ISTO ingress is not public, so you cannot hit it directly from anywhere. So in the context was Utkarsh just said, so the public authentication system always has a default callback URL. So in this case, it should be the default URL of the ISTO ingress, which you may create a load balancer or something. But in this case, what happens in our cases? So ideally, the request, if you do it directly to this particular load balancer, which is ideally a internal load balancer of Azure, it cannot be accessible. So you cannot be authenticated. So what ideally you have to do is, whenever you want to access this ISTO ingress gateway, go and hit this particular gateway. Okay, so I hope this is visible. So this is a application gateway from the Azure side, and you have to hit this so that it can go and internally talk to this particular ingress gateway. Okay, so what Utkarsh just said, instead of using the public, so the IP address or any of the DNS of this in ISTO ingress, you can configure your own callback URL, which is in this case should be your application gateway URL, which is a public URL. In fact, does that make sense?
By the way, just for everyone else on the call, Samir had explained this a meeting or two ago, and he's re-explaining it for your benefit. Yes, you. So.
Yeah. So how the request flows actually is, now this is the user and this is your website, wherein you go to your website, then you want to access some of these systems or some of these services which is running here. So you cannot, ideally in a general scenario, what happens when you hit something in the website here, it should directly go and hit the ISTO ingress gateway, and then everything you can access. But for the security reasons, what we have provisioned the application gateway, which is a Azure service, because to give you the whole infra is in Azure. So this is Azure application gateway, wherein you hit your website or anything of your address or DNS name, it goes to the name server, and finally it goes to the public IP of your application gateway. Okay, so from there, it executes some of the rules to identify whether it is from a authorized authorized signatory or not, anything. And then it will, after it is authenticated here with these rules, HTTP and HTTPS rules, then it will forward this to the endpoint of these ISTO ingress URL. If you see this endpoint, this is a private link of Azure. So only the Azure resource can identify these things. In this case, everything, whatever you see, all are private. So ISTO ingress gateway is also, though it is an ingress gateway, but this is a type load balancer and it is an internal load balancer. So which is again, like however you can connect to them with all of this admin plane. So wherein it has a like, SSH certificate or SSH connection, or you can say any of the private key connection, which will enable your application to do that. So this is ideally a same blog post regarding that. You can just go around. Yeah, so
That's so cool. That's really great. Quick verification, and no doubt this is in the blog post, but I'll lead by example and ask a silly question so everyone else can follow. The private link between the application gateway and, oh, okay, actually it says it right there, between Azure DNS. I was going to ask where, if that DNS is, also in Azure, and it looks like, so there's your user.
Yes. So whenever you see private link dot centralindia dot agmktest.io, so this is ideally the middle one is your location wherein you are hosting your application, and the last one is the DNS name which Azure hosts in their services. So ideally, if you go here, you can see. So there is a Azure site wherein you can find what all are the DNS name you can use to have this point. If I go to this link,
What's the M stand for? AZM-Kates.
yeah, so that is Azure KTS. Yeah, so this is ideally the one which we are using. If you can see here, yeah, so this is the region we are using. So before this private link, you can, like, in our case, it is ISTO gateway dot private link dot something, and this should be kind of unique throughout this Azure infrastructure. So this region are being provided by Azure itself, so you can use this. But if you want to use your own domain name, you have to do some more configurations.
Going once, going twice. Cool. Like, for some of us, we're quite thankful that you wrote a blog post because it'll take a long time to digest what's going on.
Yeah, maybe you can.
That's great. Samir, beautiful. Hey, we're gonna have to go we're gonna have to go be social with that blog post. That's awesome. Let me. Does anybody else have some questions? If not, I'm gonna show another diagram, because what engineer doesn't love looking at diagrams? Cool. If you come up with others while we're going, so I'll just go ahead and bookmark this blog post. All right. So all right. So Samir's challenge is not an uncommon one. As a matter of fact, this same challenge where, Samir, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're deploying, you're using a managed Kubernetes service from Azure AKS. You're running Istio in that environment on, and by the way, at this point, like, is it a single cluster or are there multiple?
It is a single cluster as of now.
Perfect. Okay. And
it has a capability to scale up to 1,000 instances. So
I see. Okay. So single Kubernetes. Okay. By the way, I'm curious about that. Do they just auto upgrade the control plane and the kubelets, like the nodes? I mean, maybe I should actually go use one of these managed services. But do they give you forewarning as to when that's going to happen, or is that they just empower you to control your Kubernetes version?
Yes. So whenever you kind of configure this, then there is a configuration wherein you can tell I can do, or I can go until this. Okay, if you can give 100, then until it is 100, then you cannot they will not give you any alert. So after that, they will just give you an alert that your quota has been filled. Would you really like to go beyond that? So no.
Okay. Okay. Do they give you a lot of choice over what Kubernetes version is running?
Yes. So ideally, that is a node pool which you have to define, and that in that node pool you have to give what is the version. So ideally it will be already in the latest one. So currently it is version 19. So you can go to 18 version, and you can also go to preview version of 20 or 21, I guess.
Gotcha. Okay, nice, cool. Thanks for that education. Actually, that was a freebie for me.
Yeah, but one thing is, whatever scale happens, all will have the same Kubernetes version, because master node doesn't scale, because that is a ideal, or you can say that is a primary node wherein Kubernetes is there. But the same configuration what you have to do for the node pool, that will be applied for all the scaling.
Okay, well then, hey, to tie off this set of conversations around the enhancing the way in which clients can authenticate to Meshery server. So specifically Meshery CTL as a client of Meshery server to authenticate and make secure requests to, to ensure that each of the Meshery CTL commands that are being executed are in fact authenticated, and that user has permission to invoke, to stop Meshery, start Meshery, deploy a mesh, all those things. So that's really foundational to some things to come with respect to authorization. So it's one thing to have authenticated the user and say, this token here represents the verified proof that you are who you say you are, but whether or not you have the permission to deploy another instance of Istio, or for example, that's future functionality, authorization, future functionality to come. I'm tossing, and so in accordance with Samir's use case, I don't want to repeat things that Utkarsh had said, but in essence, with Meshery running behind the Istio ingress gateway here, basically with Meshery running on the service mesh as well, it's the traffic and the interactions that happen with Meshery server need to flow, need to follow this flow. And as a user, when you go to authenticate to Meshery server, you can, currently you have choice of a local provider or a remote provider. The remote providers bring a little more functionality. One of the things that they bring is persistence. So it's sort of like to remember the performance tests you've done, your configuration settings, etc. And so the remote provider that's available today is it's called Meshery in the dropdown when you sign in. And the interactions and then when you sign in, you have this. I know that this is quite the eye chart. Let me move some of the, and you don't have to digest this, and but this is the architecture and the interactions that happen for Meshery remote provider, for Meshery Cloud. You all are no doubt familiar with the fact that you get presented a choice of, different identity providers, like which one do you want to sign into if you want to use Meshery Cloud, if you want to use Meshery remote provider. Well, and the way that those interactions happen, clearly there's an authentication that goes on with the provider of your choice. And then, a token, a jot is created and that gets handed off. And there's interactions that happen between Meshery server and the remote provider. This example is specifically what happens with Meshery Cloud. People can write other remote providers to do different things if they want, but this is the canonical implementation, if you will. That's sort of the example. Well, and the challenge in Samir's environment is that the return path for once you've authenticated and it's time to pass back your token, as Utkarsh was saying, there was a lack of consideration for the fact that that callback URL, like where Meshery Cloud needs to call back to Meshery server, that needs to be configurable, because that can be totally environment dependent. And as Samir is highlighting, and as he's been kindly explaining to me about how Azure DNS works and how Azure is like that URL, whether it's this or whether it's something else, that's totally custom to Samir's deployment. So that needs to be a configurable item. He needs to be able to tell Meshery, hey, this is where I want you to call back to. And so that's what this is sort of defining. And it turns out to achieve that is relatively easy in terms of adding the ability for the person who deploys Meshery to just provide that a custom callback URL. So a lot of time spent on authentication today and kind of how the flows and things, more than I would expect anyone who's seeing those diagrams for the first time to really digest. The nice thing is Samir's got a very well-written post that we can all go absorb. So any other questions or comments on this topic before we go to the next?
Oh, I had a few doubts, but like it would take some time, I guess. Should I skip it? Or?
Navendu, do we have, what do we have time, or I don't know what else is on the agenda? Next on the agenda. Oh, Drew, you're up next anyway. So I guess, yeah, why don't you hit your question quick and then move into your.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So let me share my screen first while things are loading. I can ask my doubts. Let's hope my Zoom doesn't crash. So basically, Istio, few of the charts which were there in the new version of Istio were not working with Grafana. They were using custom charts, due to which was breaking things for us, and now it is fixed in a nutshell. Okay, great. So basically, the two boards which were not working properly were Istio mesh board and Istio service dashboards. We were basically not able to see the panels over here, which has now been fixed. I don't know if this will take long. I'll just use this as only one option. Yeah, great. And yeah, they should be working now. And yeah, that's a small update, I guess. If you want to get deep into why this was not working, was because they shifted to a custom Grafana chart instead of the default layouts, and we had to like adjust to that particular thing in the backend to get those charts. So that was the reason why this was happening. Uh, So that's all, I guess. Any questions? If anyone has any, you must have seen these charts, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I'd be willing to bet that the majority of the individuals on this call have not seen these charts. Like, and that we're trying to work to change that. We're trying to work to make it where actually it would be the inverse, that most people, when they deploy Meshery, they would see some of these metrics, some of these charts, like basically right when they bring up Meshery for the first time. And so this effort that Dhruv is giving here is helping us get there. In the meantime, though, it would be really great for all of you to be able to connect to Grafana and see some metrics, play with these things. Ayush has been making some enhancements in the way that the charts work, and he's ready to work on some different style charts. And so I'm going to put a URL into the chat that's to a set of labs that will take all of you through setting up Meshery, deploying Istio, deploying Grafana, and connecting Meshery and Grafana together. And that way, hopefully then all of you can get to the point where you've got these charts and you can play around with them. I'd be curious, particularly for those that are DevOps oriented, or gosh, that's such a horrible use of that word. But for any of you who are operations oriented, you might have an opinion over what charts are being shown. One of the questions we need to ask ourselves, we need to ask and answer is, well, if we're trying to facilitate some quick insights as to the health of your mesh and the health of the services that are running on your mesh, like your Kubernetes environment and things, like, hey, what stats should we show? Like, what would be helpful to people? So that I'll leave that question with all of you. Many of the service meshes come with an embedded instance of an optional embedded instance of Prometheus and Grafana. Istio does, Linkerd does, and then off the top of my head, I couldn't prattle off the rest. Kuma and Open Service Mesh, I don't know. But, and so, like, what I'm saying is, like, deploying the majority of the time, people are going to want to have these insights. And so, it is the case that we don't necessarily, that Meshery doesn't necessarily need to have a Grafana instance deployed. Meshery can directly speak to Prometheus. It can discover if Prometheus is already in the environment, and it can actually query Prometheus for particular metrics. So that question that I asked each of you, basically, which is, what information, what chart do you think should be shown, or charts? The world is your oyster there a bit, like, it could be a default chart that ships with Linkerd's configuration or Istio's configuration in Grafana, or it could just be a metric that we could retrieve from Prometheus. So anyway, think about it. And I'll put the link to the labs in the chat. Anything else for Dhruv before we? Back to you, Navendu.
Thank you, Dhruv. Thank you, Lee. Next up, we have a demo on Meshery applications. Gaurav, would you like to talk about the new construct applications and possibly do a demo?
Let me share this.
Recently, we have added supports to deploy service mesh patterns from the Meshery UI, patterns UI itself. And yeah, let me just demo this pattern first. Yeah, here we have the STO pattern here. And when we hit this, the deploy button in the actions, we can check whether it is deployed or not and going to the console. Let me just first connect the STO service. I think I haven't started to operate on this.
It's like watching paint dry. Who's got a joke?
Lee, could you just fill in on what applications are and?
Oh yeah. Oh hey, yeah, this is great. So actually, I didn't realize. Are we demoing applications? Is that the thing, or are we doing? Is he deploying patterns?
I'm first showing the deployment of the patterns, then we can move to that.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about applications for a moment, if we can. Mr. Gefeller is on the call, and so I'm saying his name so his ears perk up just in case he was otherwise distracted, which generally isn't the case. As a side note, so let's talk about when we think about applications. All right, so Samir had asked the question some long time ago, as he had entered into the community and was familiarizing with Meshery, and part of his question was, hey, this is intriguing, this is neat, I'm going to look to use it. He didn't say he was going to write such a beautiful blog post, but that's great. He did say, so while Meshery is managing my service mesh, it's quite helpful, but also the reason that I'm running the service mesh is because I have these services, these apps, these workloads running on the mesh. And I'm going to have some running off of a mesh potentially as well. So is Meshery cognizant of that? Like, what can it do for me? And it's not that there aren't other tools out there to help with application lifecycle management of services that are running in Kubernetes or even on a service mesh. It's not like Helm doesn't help you in this regard, or there's a litany of tools. I didn't mean to call out Helm specifically. What I meant to say is that you can still use most of those tools to deploy your apps onto the mesh. There are certain apps that require onboarding, and there are onboarding preparations to do in order to get your app ready to deploy on the mesh. And so historically, or earlier on, and really sort of even at this moment, the stable versions of Meshery do bake in a couple of sample apps to help you explore, learn, try out things, compare service meshes, benchmark performance across them. Meshery current stable release also lets you deploy your own custom services, your own custom Kubernetes manifests. But the user experience is not compelling. It's not, you may as well use Helm or whatever else you're using. Of what Gaurav and Navendu and of what all of you are working on, the purpose of making applications, which in my mind is somewhat synonymous with the workload, making it its own first-class citizen has to do with, well, it has to do with the fact that Meshery will hopefully ultimately help with, it'll do a bunch of things around applications, but hopefully like ultimately help with onboarding services onto the mesh, offboarding them off the mesh. Like, hey, I mean, like the notion that we would have applications as a first-class citizen should be, hopefully is like fairly intuitive and is sort of like of course. And part of the reason I would say that is because like applications are king, which is applications are why we're running the infrastructure in the first place. So if we're not loving on them, treating, understanding them, assisting them as they go onto the mesh, off the mesh, then, it's not like we wouldn't have a great tool. It's just that we're, missing a significant portion of why we're running this stuff in the first place. By the way, if the application is king, what does that make the developer in terms of their royalty? Think about it. So if you're a female on the call, I might say that that makes the developer the queen, because developers, there's more and more importance in kind of being given to developers, and the fact that there's developer-defined infrastructure. They make some of these early choices and set forth how things are going to run. And so for all the dudes on the call that are developers, like, I'm sorry. I guess your royalty of maybe, anyway, you're queens as well in my book. So the deal here is Michael was grokking this after just a single sentence saying, hey, we should have support for applications in Meshery. And a great question he was asking is, okay, all right, good. Hey, what does that mean for different adapters? What does that mean for the existing sample apps? There are those baked in sample apps that that you can have deployed by invoking an operation, by invoking an adapter operation. Those operations will continue to live on for some time. They're like internal to the mechanics of Meshery adapters. There's the way that Meshery server interfaces with Meshery adapters is using gRPC. And there's a protobuf that defines that interaction. Part of that protobuf defines the fact that an adapter can bring any number of operations to the table. Some of those operations are like sample apps, the ability to deploy them, operations like deploy the mesh, delete the mesh, etc. And that's it pained me no end a year and a half to 2 years ago now when that was first created. We created categories of operations, and that was about as much forethought that we could give to what that design at the time. We just couldn't expend more energy to bring something, a way of articulating and capturing those variety of operations that you're going to want an adapter to perform on a mesh or on an application. We didn't have there wasn't anything elegant enough at the time. As a matter of fact, at the time, part of the solution that we're using around service mesh patterns, well, some of that underlying technology wasn't necessarily available. And so as we shift to include an alternative style of operations, we have the current set, which is available in all of the adapters, which are like internal to all of you that are on the call that are potentially contributing here, that those have been sometimes referred to as like mesh ops, or like those are service mesh operations. I think that we should use that portmanteau, mesh ops, in a different way externally. I think that's a good, but and now there becomes these pattern ops, or these operations that are performed, defined and registered and invoked in a much more flexible style system through service mesh patterns. And eventually, I hope, eventually, like the thought is that those will probably displace these older older operations and the more static kind of gRPC protobuf defined method. But in the meantime, both of those style operations can be invoked on an adapter. An adapter is capable of taking care of both of those. Right now, it's really the Istio adapter that we've been focused on building that capability into, the patterns operations capability. And so if you're into Golang and you want to make an impact on adapters, like come talk, go say so in the Meshery channel, because that's needed. So Gaurav, I took a lot of your time. What I was trying to say is that we, ideally we begin to let people not bake in statically defined sample apps. That's fine. We should continue to ship those, and that's great, and it's helpful, and it facilitates education and understanding of the tool. But we should much more, in a first-class way, focus on allowing people to bring their own apps and have lifecycle management over those apps, auto-discover those apps, interface with source code management for those apps being primarily like Kubernetes manifests. And so Gaurav, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, you explained applications like from top to bottom. So currently for applications, we will be having more sample new applications that will be added to the application UI with reference to the pattern files, and later on deploy button, deploy part for the applications will also be there, and you can set your apply applications over it also. Also demo the pattern. Yeah, so over here you can see you can deploy your patterns from the patterns UI itself, and I want to ask that are we planning to visualize this deployment from the UI itself also?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Gaurav. We are still missing that. We need to add the apply button in applications as well, right?
Yeah.
Lee, were you about to ask something?
Nope.
Thank you, Gaurav. Really looking forward to having the ability to deploy applications. We are out of time today, and we still have a couple of items left in the agenda. So I think we will go for a little bit more, but uh, if you are busy elsewhere, then feel free to jump off the call, and we will see you next in the next community call, hopefully. And if you are a newcomer, we have a call tomorrow, the newcomers call, so you can join the call, and it should help you get oriented with layer 5 projects. With that, bye everyone, and hello everyone who are still on the call. Piyush, would you like to show your recent PR?
Okay, I will share like what have I done.
Yeah, and if you could you give some context to
Yeah.
what the health checks are? And yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. So health checks are something to verify the health of some components related to Meshery. Just for an example, we want to verify if Docker is running or not, if Kubernetes is running or not, the deployed adapters are running correctly or not. Okay, these are some just examples, and we have various functions to work with them. And this topic is kind of related to reworking of all these health checks to be triggered. More like we previously had various functions. For Docker, we had a function. For Kubernetes, we had a function. And for adapters, there was a separate function. And there were multiple functions. And if some developer in future wants to interact with these functions, he or she might like have troubles with working with them. Okay, so on Sunday, on the last Sunday, we had a call where we decided to rework these all checks to work in a simpler way. And that simpler way is what I'm going to discuss with you guys. And I want feedback on how this is. Okay. Okay. So this is something that's called health check options, where we have some kind of what should I say, some options to be marked before triggering these health checks. So like let's say print logs. If we want to print logs whenever we are triggering these checks, is this a pre-runny? What is pre-runny? Let me show you. So if you have worked with Cobra commands, there is always a pre-runny with each of these commands. And if we are triggering these health checks from this pre-runny thing, then we have to mark this as true. This is the sub command, like I have written here, the command under which the health checks are being triggered. If we want to run Docker checks, if you want to run Kubernetes checks, if you want to run operator checks, and similarly, all other checks, we mark them true if you want to run them. Okay, so this is a health checker struct. What it has is the options, these options, and some things that might be used while running these checks. Okay, so this is a function to create a new health checker. And then there is this function, run function. Now this is something that is easier to use than before. There are multiple functions, and in future there can be more functions. So that would have been really trickier to work with. So I have created a simpler run function, and according to these options, whatever someone has marked them, like true, false, whatever it is, these things will run. Like if he has marked Docker checks, then we will run Docker checks. If he has marked Kubernetes checks, okay, it should be Kubernetes. But very good. So we will run the Kubernetes checks. If there are like someone wants to run Meshery component version checks, so we will be running these version checks. And what else was that? I forgot. Okay. I forgot what I was going to talk about. Sorry. Yeah. So let's see how to work with these checks. So that is very simple. Like I have created an options here, which says this is being triggered as a pre-runny. We want to print logs, and we are passing the sub command that is start with this, that this thing is being triggered from start command. Then we check, we create a new health checker, and we run pre-flight checks. There are two functions that can be used and has been exported out of this package. First is run, and the other one is run pre-flight checks. These are only the two things that is accessible outside of this package. So that's how things work. So let's talk about these options, how these options will work. So if someone has marked print logs true, whenever someone will trigger these checks, these things will be printed, like Docker is not running,
like failed to start Docker, Docker is running, things like that. Like can initialize Kubernetes client. So we are checking if someone has marked print logs true, then we will be printing these. If he has not marked, like in this case, whenever we are triggering pre-run E, we don't want to show the user these logs because they are not relevant here. So we have marked print logs false. And we want to grab these errors. If in case someone has marked print logs false, that means that guy or that developer wants to grab the errors out of it. So if someone is marked print logs false, in that case, we actually return errors, actual errors, rather than printing warnings that this thing is not initialized. We are not finding Docker here, something like that. We won't be printing it, we will be returning it because developer is actually trying to grab the errors out of it. Example can be here. We have implemented it where it should be. It should be down here. Yeah. So I marked like print logs false. This is not a pre-running. The subcommand is nothing here. And I just want to run Kubernetes checks because I am checking if Kubernetes is available or not. So I created a health checker. I ran it and I found that there are no errors. That means Kubernetes is actually running on this this local machine. Then we will deploy whatever we want to do with the process. Okay, so this is the demo how things work, and yeah, that's it. This is how it is simpler to interact with these checks. There can be multiple checks in future, so it will be easier to talk with them, like trigger them, I mean, with these kind of options, just marking the options and running it. Yeah, that's it. That's what was new with these checks. Any suggestions or some criticism?
I'm not sure. Like I think I will test out your PR, but
Okay.
this makes things much more structured, and it should be easy. Like yeah, you can basically call any health check from anywhere, right? And configure it. Yeah, so I think it's a step forward.
Is there a set of
Where are you putting the
Okay. I guess you were saying something.
Yeah, no, Vijay, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. So where are you putting these checks? Where are you saying that I want this check, I want that check?
This is the structure, and we create a health check options structure first. Like here, we are marking run Kubernetes checks as true because that's what we want to trigger. So it has been
No,
marked true.
no, I understand that. What I was thinking is, instead of marking it there, do you have to change? Do you have to change the source code? Do you have to go and change the structure to say which checks you want?
Okay, I'm not actually like I am not able to understand what you are trying to say. Like,
No,
Maybe I can answer this. Vijay, basically, these health checks would so Meshery, each of the Meshery CTL command can invoke a part of this health check, should have an ability to invoke a part of these checks, health checks. So if you are
no,
deploying,
I
say,
understand that.
yeah,
I understand. My question is, how are you going to say, for instance, that I want to run Docker check? Do I have to go there and mark this true? Or how does that work? Or are you going to have like a file that it reads at runtime that tells it which checks to run, what checks are available and which checks to run? Is that this is what I was curious about?
so in case let's say we want to run Docker health checks. We will mark them true, and it will trigger this command will keep like make it will go through these options and will run Docker checks and return errors if we are seeking errors, or print logs if we want to print logs about Docker
No,
checks.
no, that's fine. See, what I was trying to say is, if you can create a file which has all the possible checks in that, and if you can say whether it is true or false in that file, so you won't have to go into the source code and change the source code each time you want to run this. Yes, and plus, then every application which wants to do its checks can do its own checks. One application can check off Docker, something else can check off Kubernetes, the third one can check off Kubernetes and Docker, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, so actually this is a command, like there is a command for doing all these checks with the Meshery CTL. Okay, so what is happening there? There are some flags for this, like there is a pre-flag flag. Okay, and then we can trigger adapter checks separately, we can trigger operator checks separately, and we can trigger all these checks combined. So I'll show this to you. It will just take 2 seconds. Here we have actually checked Docker and Kubernetes because these are the three requirements of running Meshery. Okay, this is a pre-flag check. So we ran pre-flag check, which is checking Docker. That Docker is running, Docker Compose is available, Kubernetes API. We can create Kubernetes client, and we are also checking the Kubernetes version if it is compatible or not. And there are multiple flags like that, and separate checks can be triggered like that. I guess that's what you were asking, right? Hello, Vijay?
I think it would make sense to have one of these options as an input to the system check command, right? So I want to run only one check. So right now we have pre and pre-flight, right? So I think what Vijay might be hinting at is I want to do only operator check. How do I do that? So,
okay, there is a flag for operator.
yeah, I think this should answer Vijay's question.
Okay, that's fine. All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Comments for Piyush?
You were saying something before.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what that was. I think it was just I know your so there's a design spec on this, and there is an open PR, and Piyush, you've given consideration to the fact that these health checks need to be invoked with high regularity, and they need to be invoked from different perspectives, some directly from the user, some as a pre-run execution before another command is executed, and like pre-run as part of Cobra, the framework that we're using to create this CLI. And you've also given consideration that these need to be executed, or they may be invoked ad hoc by other commands, as and when those other commands might need to do that within their own logic. And so, so congrats, your code's going to get a lot of use. The notion that we've got individual, like as part of the adapter flag, I wonder, it is probably just fine. Like the logic there, I'm assuming, is that for the given context, check availability, check the, the availability of every adapter that's defined in the context. And so we don't need to further allow the user to further specify just this adapter. I mean, we could, but that's probably taking the use case a little too far. Like if they had 10 adapters loaded, maybe they just want to check one. Okay, well, maybe we wouldn't have that as a flag as much as maybe that would be an input to the flag, but I don't know that that's really a use case. Like we don't need to go that far. So just kind of thinking out loud at the moment. I do think that it becomes really important. This really highlights the use of error codes, because people are going to see those stinking error codes like all the time. Can't connect to Kubernetes, and so having well-written probable causes and suggested remediations, like well-written descriptors of what's potentially going on and how to fix it, quite important. And there's more than one. There's potentially multiple of those, like more than one probable cause for why you're seeing a particular error. It would be nice to part of VJ's point, like it is. I think we have written down this list of different checks that are performed, and so while it's kind of a pain in the rump, it is advantageous to have a documented list of what those checks are and kind of what they do, to the extent that it's anything more than just like a ping, so to speak, in part because people are going to want to troubleshoot those environments and understand how to fix something, but also in part because that will help us as a set of contributors and users like reason over whether or not a given check should be mandatorily invoked like every single time any command is invoked, or whether a check should be invoked only when only when a certain class of commands are invoked. So like Meshery CTL system, that's like system is a category of subcommand. There's a category of subcommands under that. And so maybe that, like, I guess that's a question does Cobra facilitate for hierarchical invocations of pre-runny? Like, can you say at the system level, irrespective of what the subcommand that's invoked is? Yeah, okay, yeah, good. It does. All right, I don't have anything more intelligible. I guess that's all I can add. But like, I do want to highlight, like, I'm excited for my part of it, like, I'm excited to see the people that are here. And I think sometimes folks might join and say, well, hey, I'm really into operate. Like, I'm a user. I'm really just here to like learn this stuff. Or like, I'm into ops and like DevOps. And sometimes I think that people say that sheepishly, like, hey, I'm not here to necessarily write code, or that's not my thing. It's like, great. Or like, hey, yeah, don't like, thank you. Because like people need to come weigh in on this, like use these things and say some of what Samir was just saying, like it would be helpful if there was an auto scaling, if we were tracking auto scaling events, like, oh yeah, okay, right. Or like, hey, it would be helpful if there was a different flag that only let you, I don't know, that actually, it didn't just check on the operator, it like actually checked on mesh sync itself. Like, is Meshery server receiving data from mesh sync? That's what I want to know. I don't want to know if this thinking operator is like says it's up. I want to know if data is actually flowing through this pipe. And so, yeah, I'm sorry to say that Abhishek is not on the call to hear that, but the rest of you are, and so maybe that's something we could do. Cool. Oh, or anything else for today? We have questions?
Yeah, one more item. I'll just leave it here. Let me just share my screen. So similar to what Piyush has mentioned, like Meshery CTL is undergoing some refactoring. And so to make things easier and more maintainable, we are planning to propose moving all the constants and all the config related stuff into one single struct. So we recently discussed on this on a call. So so this is basic. I have written down some considerations for this in the Meshery CLI comments and documentation document, and let me just share it on the chat. So if you go to the if you go to the link, you will find this. And basically what we are trying to do is uh, to move all the configurated stuff and all the global constants into a central struct, so that we can easily reference this struct to and the reference this struct, and this struct will stay as the central source of truth. And also we have some constants spread out throughout the utils package, and this will make it more easy to reference all these. And we will add some getters and getter functions and setter functions. So before we do that, like there might be better ways to implement this. So we will keep this open for discussions for a while, and then we will start working on it. So yes, that's my item. So check those out. I will also ping in the Meshery CTL channel regarding this later. And with that, we are stopping for today. And thank you all for staying long after the call finished. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Piyush.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye bye. Yes.